All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Real News Network post-inauguration live stream. My name is Maximilian Alvarez, and I'm the editor-in-chief here at the Real News. Okay, so Donald Trump has finally left the White House, but the legacy and political infrastructure of Trumpism is probably here to stay. You know, Joe Biden was inaugurated this morning as the 46th president of the United States, and Democrats now control the House, the Senate, and the White House. But with COVID-19 still raging, with millions unemployed and evictions looming, and with a boneyard of executive and legislative destruction left by the Trump administration and the GOP, the Biden administration is entering, I guess, what we would call a burning tire fire. You know, working people in this country are hurting badly. And, you know, to be clear, they were hurting before Donald Trump ever descended that damn escalator years ago. And, you know, people are understandably having a lot of mixed feelings right now. Relief, elation, pride, bitterness, disappointment, skepticism, rage, cautious optimism, and, you know, everything in between. You know, just weeks after the world watched a far-right, Trump-supporting mob of insurgents storm the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., what unfolded this morning at the official inauguration ceremony was nothing short of a nationalist spectacle designed to assure people in the US and around the world that the nightmare is over, the center has held, America is back, the adults are back in the room, and we can all begin the fabled return to normalcy. But I think the obvious question is there even a normal for us to return to? Mira, it's going to take a long time for us to truly measure the extent of the cultural, political, and economic changes that we have all undergone during the Trump presidency. But I think it's worth reflecting now on the past 4 years while, you know, offering our best critical analyses of the possibilities for the future of the United States and its place in the world. And that's what we're going to do today on our special post-inauguration live stream here at The Real News. You know, we've been asking y'all to send us your thoughts and questions, and we're going to do our best to respond to them over the course of this live stream. Obviously, you know, we won't be able to kind of address everything in this 1 hour live stream, but we hope that, you know, the discussion here will be informative and engaging. And more than anything, we hope that it will serve as a sort of preview of the kind of coverage that we're going to be doing over the coming months and the coming years here at TRNN. So, you know, if you like what you see, if you dig what we're doing here at The Real News, and, you know, you want to stay tuned for more, then be sure to check out all the great shows that we're producing weekly. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, sign up for our newsletter, and even become a donor, which you can do by heading to our website, therealnews.com. All right, let's get to the good stuff. So we are going to be doing 2 segments for y'all today in this over the course of this live stream. So first, we're going to be checking in with some of our great reporters to get sort of short breakdowns of the key issues that we'll be focusing on in the Biden era. Then we're going to round things out with a more open panel discussion where we'll be sharing some of our thoughts on Biden's inauguration, Trump's exit, and what lies ahead for all of us. So for our first spot report, we're going to check in with the amazing Real News journalist, Jaisal Noor. If you guys haven't been following Jaisal's work for The Real News and all the great stuff that he shares on social media, you absolutely should. Jaisal is a vital part of The Real News, And, recently he's been publishing really important coverage of critical political issues, from the Democrats' surprising Senate wins in the Georgia runoff elections to the storming of the Capitol and the congressional fallout of Trump's failed insurgency. And today, Jaisal's going to give us a little rundown on the shifting power dynamics in DC and let us know about the things that he's looking out for in the coming months and years. Jaisal, take it away, man.
Well, guys, it's day one of full communism. Our work is done. We can take it easy for the next 4 years. Yeah. So, that's what the Republicans, have been selling. Unfortunately, that is, far from the truth. The reality is, it remains to be seen if Joe Biden is the president for this moment. He faces historic challenges, an economy that was already rigged, which has absolutely been absolutely destroyed for working people around this country. 400,000 people dead, and that just from the COVID-19 pandemic. That last 100,000 happened just in the last 40 days. So this is a huge crisis. Obviously, the Trump administration has downplayed, COVID-19, the impacts of the pandemic. When it became clear that, Black and brown communities would be hurt the hardest, Trump, abandoned any kind of real approach to it. So obviously, Biden is inheriting that whole mess. Polls show 66% of Americans fear they won't be able to afford healthcare this year. This is a real huge crisis. And what history has taught us is, for example, you take the Obama administration, if Democrats can't deliver serious relief, spend a lot of money and get relief in the pockets of Americans, precedent dictates that Democrats will lose their majority in the House and possibly the Senate. To give you an idea of that, 2008, Democrats had 60 Senate seats, and they lost that majority in the next 4 years. In 2008, Democrats had a 60-seat majority in the House of Representatives. That got wiped out in 2010. And this happened to it's happened to every president in modern history. Problem is, Biden doesn't have a lot of seats to lose. At 4:30 today, there's going to be 3 new Democratic senators sworn in, including the 2 big wins in Georgia, which were a surprise. That the 2 senators there could pull that off. How this has been sold is, look, we have 51 seats. We have 51 seats in the Senate now, thanks to Kamala Harris being vice president. But bills don't pass by a simple majority in the Senate. You need 60 seats because of the cloture rule, because of the filibuster. So Democrats are going to be faced with a real big opportunity here and a real big challenge, because as Republicans have shown under the leadership of Mitch McConnell, now Senate Minority Leader, is that they are expert at blocking Democratic legislation, blocking Obama's nominees to the federal judiciary. 300 or so were blocked. Republicans chose never to take them up in Obama's final years in office. We hear a lot about moderate Democrats, people like Joe Manchin. Are they going to be open to spending trillions of dollars? Biden has suggested $1.9 trillion in spending for his first bill. Are they going to be open to that? And it was widely considered that people like Manchin would not support deficit spending, would not support checks. But in recent interviews, he's indicated that he may come around to that. People like Manchin also oppose removing the filibuster. Again, 60 votes to get legislation passed. Will the Republicans, Biden has called for unity with these same Republicans that were supporting the storming of the Capitol, that have supported Trump for the last 4 years, the worst things he's done. It's really going to remain to be seen. If the Democrats can pass legislation, they do have the budget reconciliation process, which will allow them to pass 3 bills with a simple majority. You have the Supreme Court, which could overturn legislation from Democrats that is passed. So, if the Democrats don't deliver or aren't able to deliver, then they're going to have to take a look and this is the real role I see grassroots movement playing in pushing the Democrats to make the tough decisions and really deliver, because this could be Biden's only chance these next 2 years. If he loses the Senate, if he loses the House in 2022, that's going to be the end of any kind of agenda, and Democrats are going to be in real big trouble, in 2024. And I've hit my 5 minutes, so I want to make sure I don't go way over that.
My man's always on time. Thank you, Jaisal. That was great. And yeah, again, just for everyone watching, please follow Jaisal on Twitter, follow his reporting for The Real News, and stay tuned for a lot more great stuff coming from him. All right. So for our next spot report, we're going to go to our amazing and intrepid hosts of the Police Accountability Report, Stephen Janis and Taya Graham. So for those who don't know, every Thursday night, Stephen and Taya release a new episode of the Police Accountability Report. And, frankly, anyone who is interested remotely in questions of criminal justice, law enforcement, and the ways that the U.S. police system affects us all, you should absolutely be checking out PAR every week. And you should also, I should note, you should check out Stephen and Taya's new incredible documentary, which is called The Friendliest Town, which you can now rent on Apple TV and Prime Video. So please join us in supporting and celebrating the awesome work that Stephen and Taya do. And we're going to go to them now to get a spot report on, what we can expect from the criminal justice world in the coming years. So Stephen, Taya, take it away.
Hey, Max, thank you so much.
Hi, Max. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that's going to be really interesting, of course, is, people know already that the Biden administration has somewhat of a friendly relationship with policing. While he wasn't endorsed by the major police unions, he has a past history of being sort of a pro-police person, which, of course, has raised tremendous concerns with activists. And, as we well know, and as people who like us who live in democratic cities like Baltimore, policing is firmly ensconced in the political process and pretty much runs things in this town. So Democrats are not necessarily, open to reform. Now, he has pledged reform. And, one of the things that we're going to be looking for very, very closely and watching is whether or not, Biden sort of reinstitutes the Department of Justice investigations into policing, which pretty much were put on hold by the Trump administration. And we're very critical to reform here in Baltimore, what little reform we had, because in 2016, the Justice Department, after the death of Freddie Gray in police custody, came to the city and, did a pretty fulsome investigation and found a lot of corruption and unconstitutional policing. And, Taya, you want to talk a little bit about the...
Sure. Well, what I'd like to mention is that critics on the left do have a valid reason to be concerned that the Biden-Harris administration won't be tough on police reform like they hope. Part of the reason is the 1994 crime bill. It's called the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. And this was enacted during a time where Democrats were doing their best to look tough on crime. And now this bill does have some good parts to it. It has the Violence Against Women Act in it to protect people who have been victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. It also has a 10-year ban on assault weapons, but it's also been criticized for expanding mass incarceration in the United States and escalating the drug war. And one of the things that was boasted about was putting out the money to put 100,000 new police officers on the streets. So even though the majority of people who are held in prison are being held on a state level, there was a great deal of federal encouragement and funds to expand incarceration, and we're still seeing the effect of that today. So critics on the left do have good reason to be concerned that the Biden-Harris administration might not be as progressive as they hope.
Well, one of the things, we talk about a lot on the show on the Police Accountability Report is really putting policing in the proper context, and I think that will be important as we watch this new administration take over, because as we witnessed in the Capitol, and I think that really shows and great evidence of what policing really is about, is it's not about in this country law enforcement. It's about politics. And yes. I think that's why when you saw the people sort of overrunning the Capitol, had this sort of feeling that the police were going to be on their side, even though they were obviously breaking the law and aware of the fact they're breaking the law, but they felt empowered because they felt that police was on their side, meaning in a sense that policing is purely political, right? It's not a part of law enforcement. And that's what's so interesting, the dynamics, what we'll have to see with a Democratic administration. Are they willing to really call out policing and say, you know what, you have strayed far from anything that is productive in these communities? Look what happened. Now, I mean, a lot of people say, police weren't prepared, but there's a lot of evidence that some of the police were actually working with these protesters. And certainly if you listen and watch the videos, you can see that protesters saying, hey, we're on your side, we're Blue Lives Matter, we're all that. And that makes policing a really politically fraught situation for a Democratic administration, because we have seen in our own city, Democrats support horrible policing. Some of the worst police corruption cases in the history of this country occurred in Democratic cities. And clearly, as you're seeing on the screen right now, those protesters thought with all, and I can't really blame them, that police were somehow on their side, even when they're breaking the law, which is a really interesting thing. So will the Democrats be able to somehow reverse this idea that policing is purely an expression of politics, or an expression of political power, or what we like to call hegemonic policing, where police don't really work in the spirit of public safety, but rather projecting power of whoever controls them. And I think that's going to be a really critical point, because in the past, Biden has showed that he is not really, sort of in that. But there is a police advisory board, right?
Right. So within the first 100 days, Biden has promised to put in place a national police oversight committee. Now, he's promised to put that in play in the first 100 days. However, we don't have a lot of details yet on what that's going to look like. And once again, there are critics in the Progressive Party who are concerned that Kamala Harris, as was shown in her role as the top cop in California, may not be aggressive enough in pursuing and prosecuting police officers who are guilty of misconduct, brutality, and extrajudicial killings. For good reason, people are concerned that with Kamala Harris's, Vice President Harris's record, that she might not be the one who will be aggressive enough in helping create the police reform that so many want to see.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm always skeptical as a reporter of any sort of commission. That politicians say. It's sort of like, okay, here we have a commission, now we're going to do this. But we have seen, as a city that has experienced horrible brutality, we have seen commissions, task force, all sorts of other political amalgamations of people, and nothing has resulted in it. As a matter of fact, ACLU of Maryland's just released a report showing that thousands of police brutality complaints were ignored by the city of Baltimore over a period of time. And so I think that the concern is that are Democrats really going to once and for all sort of take the stance that political policing has to stop, and that policing has to be reoriented towards some sense of law enforcement? Of course, we all know that the law is corrupted, by the political process. But I think that's a critical juncture that Democrats are facing, and I personally, I have not seen it on a local level or a national level, and I do think that the Department of Justice investigations were useful, because once and for all they said, hey, Baltimore City Police practice unconstitutional and racist policing. But, since that, during that time, the same time that the Department of Justice was here, we had the horrible gun trace task force scandal.
Absolutely. That's something I wanted to add to, Stephen, that you made such a good point. While the Department of Justice was investigating Baltimore for unconstitutional and racist policing practices, we had one of the biggest police corruption scandals since the 1990s, the Rampart scandal in LA, and that was the gun trace task force. This is 9 police officers who were arrested and convicted for robbing residents, dealing drugs, and stealing overtime money out of the taxpayers' pockets. And this was happening while the Department of Justice had its eye on Baltimore City. Yeah. So when we have a little skepticism, and I would say it's a healthy skepticism of these different organizations that are going to, committees and PACs that are going to give us oversight, we've had plenty of oversight. What we need is action, change, reform.
Pure philosophical change, which the Democrats have not seemed to be willing to do, at least on the local level, where you literally philosophically, hold law enforcement accountable to be involved in, fair law enforcement, not in projecting the power or projecting or, racking up stats or racking up incarceration or feeding the system that feeds them. And I think that's going to be really difficult. And I think Biden's got quite a challenge, not just because of the reasons that Jaisal talked about, where he's got a divided Senate, but the Democrats are just as embedded with police as the Republicans. And, that's been shown throughout history. So really, Biden's going to have to make a serious break. And also, with the vice president, what Taya talked about, there isn't not a good history there.
During her tenure as California's top cop, there were many police reform advocates who were begging her to please investigate. For example, there were a series of police shootings in San Francisco. They were begging her to investigate police misconduct in California, and they got very little response.
Right,
and it wasn't until the end of her tenure in about 2016 that she actually launched an investigation going out the door into the police-involved shootings in San Francisco.
And, this would be a good time for Democrats to, really, take marijuana off the Schedule 1.
Yes.
For example, a way of, de-accelerating mass incarceration, things like that. There are other things like that they have an opportunity now, as Jaisal was pointing out, a very small window, but things that they could do. So will they have the guts to do it? Will they have the guts to go in there and say, you know what? Marijuana being Schedule 1, which means it's the most dangerous.
Considered
and also,
a heavy narcotic that's dangerous beyond prepared.
But also, as we've seen in city after city and town after town, one of the great ways, or not great ways, one of those effective ways to entangle people in our mass incarceration system, will the Democrats have the wherewithal to challenge, that sort of conventional wisdom and challenge the structure of mass incarceration and over-policing that we report on all the time?
I think Stephen has it right there. Will the Democrats have the guts to make the changes in the face of Democrats being accused of being soft on crime, which we know they're not? Will they have the guts to really take a stand and give people the police reform that they've been asking for?
All right. Well, thank you, as always, Stephen and Taya, for your incredibly important and thorough reporting. Again, if you want more of that, please tune in every week to the Police Accountability Report for more reporting from Stephen and Taya. And again, check out their documentary. We're going to be going back to Stephen and Taya in a second to talk about some other types of coverage that they're going to be doing in the coming months and years here at The Real News. But, we are running a little behind, so I'll probably smush my segment here into a kind of condensed version. But one thing that I wanted to talk about, kind of picking up on what Jaisal Noor was speaking about in his spot report a few minutes ago, right, is what the outgoing Trump administration and the incoming Biden administration, what this all means for working people and the labor movement. And, for folks who know me and my work, I have a podcast that I've been doing for years called Working People, where I interview workers from around the country about their lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles. And in many ways, the past few seasons have kind of been a document of what working people have gone through during the Trump era and even before. And so I guess I would say for folks who are interested in hearing kind of workers in their own words talk about the struggles that they have been facing recently and long term, check out Working People, which is soon to become partnered with the Real News Network here. So, okay, let's talk about the incoming Biden administration, the outgoing Trump administration, and what this means for workers, right? The Trump administration has been, frankly, disastrous for working people. And it's not just because his massive tax cuts for the wealthy have drastically increased the already horrendous wealth inequality in this country. And it's not just because the administration's catastrophic response to the COVID-19 pandemic has left so many workers vulnerable, destitute, sick, and unprotected, right? Those are bad enough on their own. But even before COVID, right, Trump's National Labor Relations Board was stocked with a murderer's row of corporate ghouls and union busters. And, under the Trump administration, the NLRB has been used by the capitalist class as, frankly, a battering ram against the labor movement, making it harder for workers to organize and making it easier for corporations and bosses to get away with exploiting workers and retaliating against them for trying to organize. As the brilliant labor journalist Kim Kelly recently wrote for Teen Vogue, quote, 4 more years of Trump would have weakened a labor movement that's already been left gasping for air, often literally in the case of the many thousands of workers who contracted COVID-19 on the job due to the federal government's shambolic, craven response to the pandemic. End quote. So again, there's no doubt that a lot of working people and unions were breathing a sigh of relief, when Joe Biden was elected. And, that probably explains why so many unions really went to the mat for Biden in the general election and in the Georgia runoffs. Unions like Unite Here, who I think deserve a real special shout out, because even though Unite Here hotel workers and service workers, even though their members faced massive layoffs from the pandemic, they were hitting the pavement in the run up to the general election in states like Nevada and Arizona. And they were hitting the pavement in Georgia in the run up to the runoff elections. And I guess the question is, like, why were they doing this? Right. With the kind of exception of the police union, who overwhelmingly voted to support and endorse Donald Trump, a lot of unions really threw their support behind Joe Biden. And Biden is on the record saying that he would be the most pro-union president. So what can working people expect? Right. I think that there is a lot of cautious optimism amongst the movement, not only with unions, but other kind of worker collectives. But there's also a lot of trepidation, right? Given the kind of evidence that we have on the table from Biden's kind of transition team, which unfortunately features a number of folks who represent the gig economy, which has been kind of the most egregious violator of misclassification of workers, which leads to lower wages, which leads to fewer protections and more exploitation. If you want a case study of that, look at the terrifying campaign that companies like Uber and DoorDash and Postmates launched in California to push through Proposition 22, which kind of solidified in law a permanent misclassification of gig workers. And I think there's a lot of understandable trepidation from people in the labor movement right now about Biden's transition team and whether kind of what we saw happen with Prop 22 in California is going to be kind of the new norm in states around the country, with companies not just in the gig economy, but all over the place, opting to kind of misclassify workers and turn the working class workforce into a kind of cast of free-floating, underpaid, underprotected task rabbits. That's a real concern that working people are facing right now. And so misclassification is one thing that the Biden administration can tackle. It can in part do this by pushing its weight behind Congress passing the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize Act, which unions like the International Union for Painters and Allied Trades and the AFL-CIO have been pushing for hard. The PRO Act would be a major bellwether in labor reform, and it would consist of, I think, some of the most important labor reforms this country will have seen in a generation or more, right? Including repealing right to work on a national level, including making it easier for workers around the country to organize with a union, enforcing companies who, to bargain in good faith, and to hold them accountable if they retaliate against workers for organizing. Obviously, debt relief, student debt relief is a huge thing for working people. An immediate stimulus package when the government its response has been so paltry to speak to the needs of working people, that would be huge. An eviction moratorium. There are signs, positive signs with Biden kind of electing Marty Walsh as his labor secretary, with whom a lot of labor advocates support. It wasn't their first choice, but it's still a better choice than what we've had. So there's a lot. It's a mixed bag, basically. I think that you guys are getting the theme of our reporting here. But I'll stop there because, again, we're running a little behind schedule, and I want to toss things back to Stephen and Taya. So for our final spot report, we're going to go back to Stephen, Janice, and Taya Graham, our two amazing hosts of the Police Accountability Report, which you can see airing on The Real News here on our YouTube channel every Thursday night. You should check out their work. You should follow them on social media, and you should absolutely subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out every week's new episode of the Police Accountability Report. But Stephen and Taya also do a lot of great work investigating kind of larger questions about inequality, right? And they have been contributing installments to an ongoing series called the Inequality Watch. And obviously, not only under Trump, but under Biden, there's going to be a lot of focus on what the Biden administration and a Democratic Congress is going to do to address the massive issues with inequality that we face in this country. So Stephen and Taya, let's throw it back to you and hear a little bit about what you're looking out for in the coming months and years when it comes to the question of inequality.
I mean, I think this particular issue is probably the most important because I think inequality has fueled, honestly, ironically, the rise of Trump and the sense that the Republicans somehow can occupy a populist space because Democrats, when they've had power, have been stymied in their efforts, if they were really sincere efforts, to address inequality. I mean, really existential is inequality. And I think coming up on that, and the most important thing to watch is the $1.9 trillion proposed coronavirus aid package, because it's targeted mostly at working families, not PPE, loans to businesses, but actually, people and working people, as you said, who have suffered probably the most under Trump of any group. And I think that, quintessential to that is the Democrats seizing that issue and somehow not always losing the rhetorical battle over this, right? They continually lose because I don't think even Obama's are, they're good at expressing just how aggrieved the American middle class and the American lower middle class, how out of balance our wealth inequality is. Thomas Piketty famously in his book, talked about wealth inequality not being the, inevitable consequence of capitalism, but rather ideological, right? And I think the Democrats have lost that battle over and over again, whether it's not because they're far too influenced by corporatists or whatever the reason is, they lose it. And critical this time is for them to be able to stake out a space where they're talking about issues, Max, like you're talking about, basic meat and potato worker issues. We see it over and over again. In Baltimore, Tay and I did a very detailed report on a building downtown, a hotel, that received a 25-year, what's known as a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, tax break, where the owner of this $150 million hotel didn't have to pay any taxes at all for 25 years, no property taxes. But they also refused to give workers a minimum wage, a working wage, or health benefits. And so, it was a perfect example of the kind of sort of neoliberal policies that this is in a democratic city that Democrats have embraced. They have to take a different rhetorical perspective, because if they don't win the rhetorical battle, they're going to just, I think, again, lose power, and they're going to give the Republicans the ability to occupy the space and say, you know what, we're the party of the working class. I mean, really, and Max, I'd be interested to hear what you're saying. It seems in some ways that Trump has, I know friends of mine from high school who I follow on Facebook who are, contractors and working class people, and they are predominantly Trump supporters. And this is because the Democrats have lost the ideological and the public discussion on inequality.
I think Stephen makes a really good point before we go back to you, Max, because Democrats have been losing this rhetorical battle. Democrats are known as the party that likes to spend money, that likes to hand out money, that likes to run at the deficit. Well, we know for a fact that President Obama put the country back in the black after President W. Bush, ballooned our deficit. Then under the Trump administration, lovely tax breaks were handed out to the upper class, and our deficit ballooned again. And now we know that the Democrats are going to come in this time under the Biden administration and have to rein back in that deficit spending. And every time the Democrats are in charge and get back a little bit of power, once again, the Republicans become deficit hawks and start complaining again and again about how we have to manage the money, even though they're the ones that ran up the tab.
But the ideology that always ensnares Democrats is neoliberalism, because it's something we discuss a lot on our reports. We talk about a lot because it's really essential. When the Democrats abandoned the idea that there was a public good or a public way to improve people's lives and look for private solutions. I mean, this is a very superficial synopsis of that idea, but Democrats are always ensnared by it. I think it'll be critical to see. Can they do, a $15 hour minimum wage? 70% of the people support it. Can they get that done? Can they get the coronavirus package done at $1.9 trillion? Can they break the cloture in the filibuster? Will they be willing to do it and not like sort of retreat to this public-private partnership or some of the things that we've seen in cities like Baltimore that have really only exacerbated inequality? And we're over 5 minutes.
Yes, 5 minutes on time this time, Max.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you, guys. And yeah, I think a lot of really, really important points that you raised, right? And I think instituting these changes in a way that's meaningful, right? I mean, like, just look at Florida, which did vote for a $15 minimum wage, but it is going to be phased in so slowly that by the time workers are actually seeing that money in their bank accounts, that minimum wage is already going to be out of step again with the cost of living in places like Florida. So anyway, that's all to say is that we've got a lot to discuss, a lot to unpack in the coming months and years, and we're excited to do it here at The Real News, and we hope that you'll join us. So I'll put a bow on this segment. There's so much more that I want to discuss, but we should move over to our panel discussion, segment 2 of our post-inauguration live stream, which is going to be hosted and moderated by our amazing Mark Steiner, who is the host of The Mark Steiner Show, Peabody Award-winning radio journalist and Baltimore legend. You should tune in every Friday for new installments of The Mark Steiner Show, which provides great discussions about politics, political strategy from the left, questions about how we got here and where we're going. So, Mark, why don't you take us away for the panel discussion portion?
Thanks, Max. I'm glad we can do this today together. And of course, we're here with Max Alvarez, our editor-in-chief. Lisa Snowden's with us, who's our managing editor, and Jaisal Noor, our political correspondent, for this discussion with you all. And this might sound perfunctory in a way, but I'm just curious because symbolism means something to people, and it plays in hearts and minds. So I'm curious to get your take on what you saw today in this inauguration. And I have my own, but I'm going to keep quiet here for a second, which is unusual for me, but I will. And just get your take on this, especially in a political context. Lisa, let me start with you.
I mean, I think that part of what a country is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So the inauguration this morning was definitely a part of that. Like, I was watching MSNBC, and they were all in on the kind of Joe Biden myth making and saying that now decency and order are restored, and we are this country of equal rights and hope and all that stuff. And I think that the last 4 years have taught us that those are still very much ideals that are way beyond our reach. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it's important to have those as things that we want, but we're like a long way from there right now.
Way long. I watched it on PBS just so I could avoid the commentary, just to kind of see, just so I could see what unfolded, and there were some emotional elements, but we'll save that. Jaisal, your thoughts?
Yeah, I know. There was so much symbolism today, and I know a lot of people were excited, happy to see Trump go. So many people have been personally affected in the last 4 years. And, as we've always said, this economy, this healthcare system was never fair, but obviously things got a lot worse for a lot of people. And that's why, part of why Trump lost. But at the end of the day, you have a new Democratic administration taking over the reins of empire, right? A country that spends more than the next 10 combined on its military. Trump, part of Trump's appeal, at least in rhetorically, was that he was going to end wars. He didn't start any new wars, but U.S. troops are deployed across the world, active in combat zones. You have the war in Somalia, where we're basically contributing to a genocide. You have the ongoing occupation of Palestinian land, conflicts all over the country, rising tensions with China. We talked about the pandemic. It's important to remember that not everyone was affected the same, right? Billionaires got nearly $1 trillion richer. Far too often, Democrats have not stood on the right side of these policies. They've been more subservient to their corporate donors, far too often. And that's a big reason why we got to Trump. So, I think it's great. I understand why people are happy, but, the work is really beginning. You think of all the thousands of laid off union workers, as Max has been talking about, that went to put their lives on the line in Georgia to go help, secure those big Senate wins. And then, Biden turns around and says, we're only going to have $1,400 checks. So already you see the compromises rolling in when it comes to working people that are suffering. And, that is something we have to be prepared for and ready to organize against.
And something that really goes in some ways, Jaisal, to the point you made in the first half hour of this broadcast, which was that is what sunk Obama and what made how they lost the Senate and how they lost all these House seats. No public option, bailing out businesses but not people, continuing the wars that they said they were going to stop. I mean, that goes exactly to your point that you so eloquently raised in the last discussion, I think. And Max, your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jaisal hits on a really important note, right? Because, I guess I just want to stress for people, anyone who's watching this who is perhaps a little unconvinced or unsure about why so many people around the country, particularly working class and lower middle class people, are skeptical or at best cautiously optimistic about what a Biden administration can do, is that, those feelings didn't come from nowhere, right? Those feelings are based on precedent. Those feelings have developed over years and decades of disappointment from both parties, right? And, even with, when we're talking about kind of what Joe Biden can do for the labor movement, to kind of pick up on what I was talking about in the previous segment, right? There's a lot of hope from unions that Biden will, throw his weight behind passing the PRO Act. But there's also a lot of trepidation from those very same unions because they remember when he was campaigning, Obama was pushing for the Employer Free Choice Act. And it was going to kind of be a really kind of important labor reform that brought a lot of kind of working people behind Obama. And then he dropped it like a bad habit as soon as he got in office, right? And it died on the floor, right? And so working people have been burned before by the Democrats, and they don't forget that, right? And if the election of Trump was not a signal to the Democrats that they should get their act together and start living up to their word, then I honestly don't know what will be. But, apart from that, I think kind of picking up on something that Lisa said that I thought was really, really important. I think it's really, really crucial, that we approach with nuance, right? That question of what this sort of belief means for people. And we don't want to minimize, like Lisa said, the value that has and the necessity that, it represents in a political sense, right? I talk to a lot of folks internationally who were understandably very relieved when the country voted Donald Trump out of office. Not because they think that Joe Biden is going to be the kind of great white savior of democracy, but I think just on a basic human level, after everything that we've been through in this country, after all the viciousness that we've seen from our neighbors and even our coworkers, people online, politicians in the media, it meant something for people to see the voters reject that. Right, to see the voters say that we don't want this, right? This is not working for us, and we reject the kind of hate and bile that a Trump presidency represented. And so I do think that's important. I think there's a really crucial and kind of bizarre. There's some crucial and bizarre dynamics at work in the ways that was wrapped up into the ceremony of the inauguration itself. And this is something that I just wanted to comment on quickly because as someone who grew up very Catholic and very conservative, right, I kept focusing on the ritualistic aspect of the inauguration proceedings, right? Even in the language, there was just this kind of perverse religiosity to the whole proceedings. I think Amy Klobuchar in her speech said just weeks ago, we watched, insurgents desecrate this temple of democracy when she was referring to the Capitol, right? There was very religious overtones to everything that was said. And, I think that more than anything, the inauguration itself, all the pomp and circumstance and ritual, it has kind of that very, for me, that very kind of Catholic resonance, right? Where if you go to church, if you go to mass on Sunday, right, especially as a kid, you learn that like the ritual kind of precedes the belief, right? You do the ritual first, and because everyone else is doing it, because that's what you do to honor the institution that you are in. And then the belief sort of follows. So I think that there is, like, kind of building on what Lisa said, there was something to the manufactured spectacle of it all that I think was trying to kind of reinvigorate people's belief that America could be better than this. And it was doing that through the kind of ritualistic ceremony that we watched this morning.
I think that's a really important point. And I wanted to jump in where we're going with real news and all this in the coming year, watching this administration and how we're going to cover this. But let me just pick up on that point for a minute with the three of you. I think that's a really important point. I mean, I think that, I've argued on and off here on the air and other places in my writing, other conversations, that symbolism is important for people. And, you had Amanda Gorman's piece, Garth Brooks, who took a flood of attacks from people on the right because he came to this inauguration. And then even one of the things I noticed, and we talked about it here at the House and other places with friends, is that, when Kamala Harris was sworn in, the idea that a Black woman, a woman of also South Asian descent, a woman was made vice president, those things are emotional for people. So the question is, and I keep thinking about what both Jaisal and Lisa and what you all said beforehand, is can the Democrats live up to the expectations? The fear is they cannot. Starting with Ossoff and Warnock in Georgia, both not being very happy about Biden pulling back on the promise of $2,000 checks. So I'm curious, let's talk a bit about how we think that might play out and how we might cover that. So where should I go? Let me go to Jaisal.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we're definitely going to keep our, fingers on the pulse. We're definitely going to be holding, whoever's in power accountable, and now it's the Democrats. And when we're talking about symbolism, question is, what are Democrats going to make common sense moves towards democracy? For example, one of the reasons why the Capitol was overrun, just last week, it's so easy to remember that we had what's been described as an attempted coup, a week ago, is that DC is not a state. It can't call up its own National Guard. And Trump had prevented local authorities from calling up its National Guard. DC's population is greater than 2 states. Puerto Rico has more than 3 million people in it. These places are essentially colonies. We talk about symbolism, that the deep undemocratic nature of this country needs to be changed in a fundamental way. Are the Democrats going to be able to get 60 votes to expand voting rights in this country? If the Republicans block legislation like that, the Democrats need to pass it, and they need to, forget the symbolism of unity, as Biden has been talking about, which is so bizarre. You want unity with people that tried to overthrow you? Like it's really something,
Let's not leave out Guam and the Virgin Islands. Lisa.
Yeah, so the way that I frame my journalism is through the least of these. So it's kind of like there won't be any movement unless it comes from the ground up, from the least of these, because the Democrats have shown us, as Max and Jaisal have spoken about, even before the terror of the reign of Trump, that they weren't interested in hearing from the least of these. And part of the reason why Biden is in office is because of the least of these. Like, it was Black and brown people. And so, like, kind of, if we're going to go back to my point earlier about the symbolism, there are people that we need to remember and honor and, like, really carry forward, because a lot of them aren't here. Like, the thing that I was thinking about kind of as I was gathering my thoughts together is the activists in Ferguson, many of whom have been killed under mysterious circumstances. Black people, Native people who have died in, just very high numbers compared to, like, the amount of people who have died of COVID-19. There are so many people who are not here to be voices for the regular people. And now it's going to be on those of us who remain to be even louder and more organized and more precise, because it's going to be so much easier to look at like Michelle Obama's admittedly very beautiful coat that she wore to the inauguration, or see even the very talented young woman poet that read a poem today, and point to that and be like, look, see, we gotten somewhere. But really, like I said before, we have so much further to go. One of the things that I've been really working on this year with the Real News is really revamping our Baltimore coverage, because it was very strong and we kind of got away from it. And we're back now because Baltimore is such a microcosm of many of the issues that we see everywhere. Like, Baltimore is a majority Black city. We cannot ignore the fact that like nobody in this country in positions of leadership has truly lived up to what is owed to this country's Black citizens. And so we can see that in Baltimore, which is, as you know very well, Mark, a city run by Democrats, even run by Black people, but there's still there's still so much work to do when it comes to giving Black people what they're owed and recognizing what Black people in this country have been denied.
So that's really a powerful point. And I think, since we are also headquartered here, this is where we are in Baltimore, and it is a microcosm. And I think Baltimore now is on the cusp, just like America's on the cusp. And that really plays into each other, kind of giving that people's perspective from the city, actually, I think does speak to the nation. And Max, as our new leader-in-chief here, the editor-in-chief of Real News, let's talk a bit about together, the four of us, about what the Real News' role should be in this coming year. Because there are many people who I think in this country are emotionally and politically conflicted about what they see. I mean, Trump was despicable, and people it was, and that people were glad to see him go. But there's so much work to do to build the world that we want, and people know can be seen, we can have. What is our role? Let's talk about what our priorities are going to be here this year, what people are going to expect from us.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I really, really appreciate it, and appreciate Lisa and Jaisal's important points. I think there is a common theme here, right? That very much speaks to kind of what we at the Real News see as our role, and why we are kind of committed to doing this work. That really is connected to what Lisa and Jaisal were just talking about, right? Because I think that one of the big takeaway points from this live stream, right, is that people are right to not expect those in power to hand them everything that they deserve. That's never happened. And it doesn't happen when you create kind of hierarchical systems with little accountability to the rank and file, right? That is what the Democratic Party has been. That is what, even a number of unions have been. It's what a lot of local governments have been, right? It is that kind of hierarchical system that is not beholden to the people that it is meant to represent, and that allows kind of this sort of elitist technocratic politics to dominate, right? It is that disempowerment of the rank and file that has allowed, I think, kind of the monsters in power to wreak as much havoc as they have, right? And really, if there's hope to be found, right, in the coming years in this country and beyond, right? Because another important part about what we do at the Real News is that the world is much bigger than the United States, right? I mean, we just had one of the most massive demonstrations by farmers in India to overturn legislation there, right? That's something to put hope in, right? That's something that can point a way towards how people from the grassroots, like Lisa said, from the bottom up, how they can use their power to push those who are in kind of positions of authority to do what they want and to do what they should be doing, right? This is something that I think a lot of unions learned after the kind of debacle with Obama totally abandoning the Employer Free Choice Act. Right. I spoke to Jim Williams, who's the general vice president of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, about the campaign to pass the PRO Act. And he's like, look, we learned our lesson. We're not expecting Biden or anyone in Congress to just give this to us. We're going to hold their feet to the fire, and we need to build a working class kind of coalition that extends beyond the labor movement, that connects the labor movement to other community organizations, right? That builds kind of bonds of solidarity across races, across languages, ethnicities, job titles, and states where people are living in, right? That is how we kind of get out of our respective silos and build the sort of power that working people need to advance like the causes that we all deserve, right? And that the people in power are very reluctant to kind of bow to unless they are forced to. And so connecting that kind of important sort of grassroots ethos of how power works and how history itself moves, where I see us at The Real News kind of taking place in that, right, is that we are trying to, I think, fulfill what was the original democratic promise of a free press. Right. If you look back to the kind of, the founding fathers, right, of this country, right, there's a lot of problematic like ways of talking about that, but like even just if you look at kind of the official histories and what the founding fathers like thought was so important about having a free press, right? It wasn't just because the press was a tool to inform people about the goings on of their world, right? That's just one part of it. More than anything, the press was supposed to be a way for people to democratically control the means of information, the means of communication, and to use those tools of the press to empower themselves to safeguard the institution of democracy itself, right? What journalism, what the kind of coverage and analysis and debate and storytelling that we do here is meant to do is to not just engage or speak to people as idle spectators and kind of, actionless, directionless consumers. It is meant to engage people. It is meant to engage the rank and file of this country and beyond in the democratic process, to report on the people, stories, and struggles that speak to what Lisa was saying about kind of the movement of history happening from the lesser of us, right? We want to be in coalition with other media outlets that are doing the work to report on these movements, right? To comment on them, to hold power accountable, as Jaisal said. And I think the driving goal, right, is to present this work in a way that engages people with us, that gets feedback from the very communities that we are trying to report on and report for, right? And that reminds people that they have a stake in shaping the future of this world. We've been battered and bruised because people in power have been trying to convince us that that is not the case and that we should leave everything up to them to decide. But that is not the case. That's not the case if you look at our history, if you look at the suffrage movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement. History moves from the bottom up. And I think that a journalism and a media organization outlet like ours would do well to kind of take up that mantle and do what it can to reinvigorate that belief in people that they themselves are part of the history-making process. And we as media makers want to be part of that as well.
So let's pick up on that in a few minutes we have left here. And I think that when you watch this inauguration today, it was multiracial, it was emotional, it was moving. And so we got to get beneath all of that. And I'm curious, how we connect to the stories that bring the reality under the mask. And I think both, Lisa and Jaisal, we've been working together for a while. In different ways, and the work you've done really speaks to that, I think. And I'm going to talk about what you see as your mainstay in terms of what we have to do here. I know, Lisa, you're looking at Baltimore, but you're also look beyond Baltimore. I mean, your passion and kind of wisdom at looking at the struggles of Black and brown people and women are really critical. And how you see all that playing out in kind of what we have to talk about, playing off what Max just said.
My work is to not get comfortable and just keep on searching. Like I feel like I've been lucky in that my network of women, of people of color, of people who are not even non-binary has been growing. And I would like for it to continue because I don't want to be one of those reporters who kind of has the same sources over and over again. Like, I know that everywhere there are people that are figuring out how to come in community and how to organize and plan. And I just want to keep finding about them and figuring out how I can use this platform to elevate them.
Jaisal.
Yeah, so
because you've done a lot of critical work here at Real News. I mean, the videos you produced of things you've done over the years, you've gotten under stuff. For folks who don't know this about Jaisal, I'll just say this: Jaisal can be like a one-man band. He can shoot, he can talk, he can write, and he does it all. So tell us a bit about where you think you have to go this year for Real News.
Yeah, so this year I'm excited to hopefully get a lot of input from our viewers about what you all want us to be covering and reporting on. Obviously, we're going to keep our fingers on the pulse in DC and keep everyone updated on how what's going to happen with the stimulus, what's going to happen with important legislation, $15 minimum wage, Green New Deal, healthcare, climate change legislation. This country's at a breaking point. I know people need relief now. So that's something we're definitely going to keep up on. We're not going to lose track of other important issues like foreign policy, what Biden's going to do about the war in Yemen, about Israel, Palestine, about Venezuela. We're going to keep him accountable, whether it's domestic policy or foreign policy. And then for the next few months, thanks to a grant from the Solutions Journalism Network, I'm also going to be doing a series of worker cooperatives, which are an incredible way to build democracy, empower workers, and a way that, as a story I have coming out soon, sort of illustrates how businesses shut down because of the pandemic can reopen in a better and stronger way. So all that, and then also, we definitely want to hear from our viewers and, want to be guided by your input as well.
Well, we're all looking forward to that. I know I am. I really can't wait. The workers' co-op thing is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I just can't wait to see what comes out of that. And so, Max, we have to wrap this up. So, in wrapping it up, again, I think we will understand Real News a little bit here in the context of this new administration, the inauguration that just happened, is that this is the reporters are really, and people working here as a really multiracial, little working class group of people who are working to really kind of create the stories that are important for the country to see, the world to see, and to tell the people's stories. So, which I think that in some ways is different than people who are used to in any kind of media, which is a kind of changing ground. So leave us with your closing thoughts.
So, thank you. I appreciate that, Mark. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their amazing work on this live stream, and to everyone watching. We hope that you enjoyed this, and we hope that you'll tune in for more events like this, more coverage like this moving forward. I want to kind of, in closing, acknowledge something, right? Because you're right, Mark, right? This is a really incredible, talented, and special group of people that I have the privilege of working with here at The Real News. Right? It was because of this group of people and what everyone here does and how committed everyone is to the work that we do. It was for that reason that I left my previous job and took this post as editor-in-chief of The Real News. Right? But obviously, we are in a pandemic. The journalism industry has been taking knocks for years and decades, and it is a constant struggle to kind of build a network like ours in a way that is sustainable and that can kind of sustain the work that we do for the long term. That has not been the case, for outlets like ours in recent months and years, right? A lot of layoffs have happened at media outlets across the country, and a lot of media outlets have experienced kind of major budget shortfalls because of the pandemic and because of other reasons. We were no different. Right, the Real News Network was originally built in, I think, a very precarious and irresponsible way, and we kind of felt the impacts of that over the past month when we here at the Real News faced a major budget cut, which resulted in, the laying off of a lot of amazing staff members. Lisa mentioned that there are a lot of people who aren't with us, and I would be remiss if I didn't end this by saying we are missing, like the folks who we worked with who we're no longer able to. Amazing folks, producers, journalists who put their stamp on this network, to whom we owe an immense debt of gratitude, and without whom we would not be who we are right now, right? I mean, like we we are carrying on, I think, the legacy of the Real News because of the work that everyone who has worked for this network has done. And we are trying to rebuild this network for the future in a way that is viewer supported, that is reliant upon small donations, that really expands our reach so that we are kind of more connected with the broader ecosystem of media outlets that are contributing to the struggle that we talked about, and that, really shine a light on the issues that are most important, both in the US and beyond, right? And like you said, Mark, it's because of the people here at the Real News that we are able to do that. It's because of the amazing people here and everything that they bring to the table that we are able to kind of commit ourselves daily to doing this work, even when it's hard, even when things are terrible. And I'm exceedingly grateful for that. And I'm exceedingly grateful for all of our supporters, our followers, and our viewers. And I hope that you all will help us kind of build towards the future and support our work moving forward. So please become a donor, become a subscriber, let us know what you think, and we'll continue bringing you coverage that we hope will serve you and serve the cause.
Max Alvarez, our editor-in-chief, Lisa Snowden, our managing editor, and also runs the Baltimore Stories and Bureau, and Jaisal Noor, political correspondent who does amazing work here at the Real News. So please let us know what you think. Let me thank Dwayne Gladden, our studio head, who made this whole operation home today, and thank all of you. And yes, Dwayne. And so thank you all for watching. Do let us know what you think. I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. We got more coming at you. Thanks for joining us, and take care.